We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you is Wednesday, November 19th here in Seoul. I'm Isujin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Niall.
Good morning.
Good morning. Also, Brooke is with us.
Hello, glad to be here.
And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So it's already Wednesday, we're officially halfway through the week, and as we push through this midweek slump, it's a good moment to pause and think about something important. So today is Child Abuse Prevention Day, a day dedicated to raising awareness and protecting the most vulnerable among us. So now, can you help us understand more about this day and why it matters?
It's a national Memorial Day. It's been designated since 2007 to raise public awareness of child abuse prevention. There are various annual ceremonies and events held to promote the prevention of child abuse. Children are the future of this nation and every other nation, and their early years shape them for life. So abuse prevention could mean changes in so many different areas beyond just a single individual.
Right. So do you have anything to add to this?
Yes, so today I am actually wearing blue because this is the color for child abuse awareness, and I felt that it was fitting to wear it today on Child Abuse Prevention Day. And I'd also like to add that tomorrow is World Children's Day. This is celebrated every year on November 20th, and it is to put a spotlight on these issues that we're talking about today and to try to promote the well-being of our children. This date actually holds special significance because on November 20th, 1959, the UN General Assembly adopted the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, and in 1989 it adopted the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So this is a very important week, I would say, for this topic, and I'm glad that we're going to be addressing it today.
So thank you for mentioning all those dates, and this is all a very meaningful reminder. These commemorative days aren't just symbolic, they're really about refocusing our attention on the rights and safety of children. And having these conversations really bring home why awareness and prevention matter. We'll be getting more into this, but first, let's take a look at the screen. Some issues deserve to be brought to the forefront again and again simply because the consequences are so serious. And one of those issues is child abuse. That's why days like Child Abuse Prevention Day exist, to remind us that protecting children isn't a one-day effort but an ongoing responsibility. So today on News Generation, we're taking a closer look at this critical challenge, from the misconceptions many people still have about what constitutes abuse to the fine line between discipline and physical punishment, and why understanding these boundaries is essential. So as we just saw in the video, child abuse isn't always obvious, and the line between discipline and harm can be blurred or misunderstood. And that's exactly why awareness and clear guidelines matter so much. And as mentioned earlier, the definition of abuse can look very different depending on who you ask. Culture norms, personal experiences, even the era you grew up in, all of these shape how people view discipline. So to start us off, Niall, how do generational differences influence the way people understand what counts as discipline versus abuse?
Right, so the standards and common beliefs about child abuse vary by country and generation. Even the Korean Child Welfare Act's boundaries of abuse are not crystal clear, so judgments vary by case. But even for disciplinary purposes, physical punishment has a high likelihood of being considered abuse. As for Korea's millennials, corporal punishment was common during our childhood, and it was often practiced as a form of discipline called the rod of love. They actually had a rod. But in the older generations, Gen X, baby boomers, corporal punishment did not always have that kind of boundary. Sometimes it was just straight up physical violence. And I personally grew up experiencing it in school as well, having forgotten something at home or not having done my homework. And I was in 1st and 2nd grade, and I felt the might of the rod of love. Again, it is now legally prohibited here in Korea, but there are very gray areas surrounding verbal and emotional abuse still to this day.
Right, and it's striking how much has changed. So what used to be seen as normal discipline or even an act of love, as you said, is now recognized as harmful and illegal. It really shows how society's understanding keeps evolving. It's interesting how quickly those norms have shifted. So how does this compare to the US? How is physical discipline schools viewed there, Brooke?
Well, first, Niall, I'm sorry that you went through that, and I'm very glad that it is legally prohibited here to do that now. Turning to the U.S., personally, growing up, I was fortunate enough to not experience or witness corporal punishment in schools. The furthest my teachers went was to wash students' mouths out with soap if they ever used curse words. But I do have relatives from older generations that have talked about being smacked on the hands with rulers. And of course, there are many, countless stories of child abuse that goes on in American schools. So it definitely does exist. Overall, though, I would say that the public opinion on corporal punishment in American schools is quite negative. In 2023, a survey found that 65%, so an overwhelming majority of Americans support a federal ban on physical discipline in schools, but this has not happened yet, and so it is actually still legal in 17 states. So basically, in other words, we still have quite a long way to go in terms of the laws catching up with the public opinion, and big differences still exist depending on where you live in the U.S., how you grew up, your cultural background. Every household is different when it comes to how they approach discipline.
So that must be a huge adjustment for some parents. So what they see as supervision or guidance can suddenly be seen as abuse, and it really highlights how different cultural expectations can also create misunderstandings. So even well-intentioned parents may not recognize that their idea of discipline is considered unacceptable in other cultures. And in Korea, now that many millennials and Gen Zs are becoming parents themselves, as you have, so how are they defining discipline now?
The most millennials and Gen Z parents that I've personally met tend to believe that corporal punishment is not acceptable. It was naturally the first to be noticed because some of us experienced it in school, and so it was the first to go. However, society is still very not too sensitive when it comes to verbal, emotional abuse, or even neglect, which is clearly abuse. Let's take a look at this survey by Korea Research from 2021. Parents were asked what they thought were reasons for child abuse in homes, and the highest ranking answer was lack of awareness in the difference between discipline and abuse at 36%. Then following was lack of parenting knowledge and skills at 30%, and lastly, lack of understanding of the parental role at 28%. So it seems that not everyone is on the same page when it comes to appropriate measures when it comes to discipline versus abuse.
So while avoiding physical punishment is a positive shift, it seems like there can also be unintended consequences if parents don't know where to draw the line. For instance, being too lenient or overprotective. So could overprotection or avoiding discipline create new challenges for children, Brooke?
Right. Well, I think my position will be pretty clear throughout this show. I believe that physical discipline has no place in the household or in schools. I think there's always a better way to approach the problem. But that's not to say that there should be no discipline at all, because we are preparing these young humans to go into society. We are trying to give them the tools to do so. And so I do think there needs to be rules and boundaries. But these days there has been a lot of controversy around, for example, teachers' authority. They feel undermined and like their hands are tied and that they can't exercise that authority to enforce rules and boundaries for fear of backlash. For example, there was one viral post about a teacher here in Korea who wrote the word 경고 in Korean, which means warning. She wrote that on a student's notebook, and parents were very upset about this. And some of the comments agreed with the parents, and some of the comments said they thought the teacher that they did nothing wrong. So this is a debate not just in Korea, but all over the world. I'm not a parent myself. It's a very difficult and sensitive topic to try and tell people how to discipline their children. But I will say psychologists warn that no boundaries can lead to children not being able to handle conflict or handle their emotions. Similarly, physical discipline can lead to long-term harm as well. So I think it's all about finding a happy medium to teach children responsibility and not harm them at the same time.
So that's a really interesting example, and it shows how divided opinions can be. What some parents see as a small warning, others might see it as excessive, and it really highlights how tricky it can be to judge discipline versus abuse sometimes. So to give you a clearer sense of how complicated this can be, we're going to do a quick OX quiz with our panelists. So let's see what they think counts as discipline versus abuse. So here's the first scenario. Imagine a parent says, if you don't listen, get out of the house, while scolding their child. So is this considered abuse, Niall?
I'm going to go with the careful X on this because I've personally heard this one before. A phrase many of us growing up here in Korea or abroad have heard. It's very hurtful to hear for sure, but I don't know if I would personally report someone for child abuse for saying that specific one phrase. Do I think it's an inappropriate expression of anger from the parent? Yeah, it's very inappropriate. Often they tell you to go outside, and if you actually do go, you'll get in more trouble. So in some ways, I see it as being petty from the parents' part. So come on, parents, be better.
And your thoughts on this?
I think it is crossing the line. I do think parents often use, a form of threat to discipline their child. For example, when I was younger and my siblings and I would be in the backseat of the car fighting like cats and dogs, my dad, all he had to say was, "Don't make me pull this car over," and we would stop misbehaving. And a lot of parents, you hear them say, "I'm going to count to 3, and when I get to 3, I'm going to take away your toy." I think those kinds of threats are acceptable. I think where it crosses an emotional boundary is when you tell them to leave the house, because your home is supposed to be your safe place, your sense of security and shelter, and so you should never threaten a child's safety, particularly when they start getting into their teenage years. If you tell them to leave the house, you never know, they might just run away and not come back. It's not worth the risk. There are better options available to you that won't harm your child.
Like you said before, I think finding middle ground is really important, especially in these kind of situations. So to give you one more situation, a child is throwing a tantrum, so the parent sits them on top of the dresser and tells them to reflect on their behavior and then leaves the room. So is this discipline or abuse, Niall?
I'm going to go with a yes, but there are interesting red flags here because the top of the dresser part seems to be dangerous, especially if the child is throwing a tantrum. They're very emotional. But I guess the rest of it, taking out the drawer part, I do think that timeout is a great way to encourage reflection and emotional regulation. Now, if you left the room and you locked it, and again, neglect or putting the child in danger, that's definitely always a red flag. And yes, in that case, I would consider that an abuse.
And your thoughts on this?
Yes, I would agree with Niall. I think that this is, I've never heard of this, putting a child on top of somewhere dangerous. I don't think that you should have to put your child in danger to discipline them. We do have timeout in America, but it's usually in a chair that is an appropriate height for the child. It is in a safe environment where they can focus on reflecting. That's what you're wanting them to do. If they're worried about falling off a dresser, they're not going to be thinking about their own behavior. And you have to remember, we're thinking about children here. They might not understand that they're supposed to sit still on top of this dresser. And I think you probably would be liable if they fell and injured themselves. I'm sure we will talk about this more with our legal expert later, but yeah, I think this is unacceptable to put your child in danger in order to discipline them.
Right. I think helping your child realize on their own like what they did was wrong is really important. But at the same time, like if they're in a situation where they don't feel safe, that's definitely wrong. So at the start of the show, you might have thought, how can anyone be confused about what counts as discipline versus abuse? But as we've seen, it's actually a lot more complicated than it seems. And that's why we're going to turn to a legal expert who will break down these two cases from a legal standpoint. And that conversation is coming right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out Channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
So joining us today is Kim Ji-soo, a spokesperson for the Korean Bar Association and a licensed practicing lawyer here in Korea. So hi Ji-soo, thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Thank you for having me again.
So far, we've looked at two cases here and discussed whether they might count as child abuse or just discipline. So in the first case, as you've heard, if a parent says get out to their child, would that be considered abuse? And for our second case, where a child was placed in front of a dresser and the parent leaves the room, is that abuse or discipline, in your opinion?
So first of all, the answer to the question is yes to both cases. Both cases are considered as an abuse, and I can apparently see that Brooke has got it all right, and I'm sorry for Niall. But I think many Koreans would have presumed as Niall because telling the child to go outside is quite a practical norm in Korea in the past few days. And let me walk through these two cases with you based on how Korean law sees them today. So in both situations, the focus is not on what parents intended to do, but on how the child was affected. And as Brooke mentioned, the court focuses mainly on how the child was feeling in this kind of situation. Was it crossing the line? Was it a situation where it's distressing them? And in the first case, when the parent says, "Get out," it sends the child a message of fear and probably a possibility of feeling shame, and they can be stressed out especially in the cold winter like right now. And that impact alone is enough for the law to step in right now. And in the second cases, placing a young child on top of a tall drawer and leaving in the room, the Korean Supreme Court has already ruled this as an abuse, where as the quoting court's decision, a high place is unsafe and being left alone that can cause strong fear and a deep sense of isolation is considered as an abuse. And physical injury doesn't need to happen, and fear itself is considered harmful. So this is why both actions are clearly understood as child abuse under Korean law.
Wow, thank you for that. So legally, when we do approach this, how do we distinguish between what counts as abuse and what counts as discipline?
So when Korean law look at this question, the focus shifts onto only one thing: the child's safety and emotional states. So if a child is put under serious stress, feels threatened, or faces any kind of harm, physical or both emotional, the law treats them as abuse. And discipline is a bit different. And I think Brooke have definitely illustrated this very well. It has to be steady, measured, and centered on teaching, not fear. And it can set limits, for example, grounding a child for one's behavior, but it definitely cannot create panic, humiliation, or any kind of risk that can harm child in both emotional and physical ways. So from a legal standpoint, the line becomes quite clear for right now. Actions that cause real fear or harm fall into abuse, while actions that guide a child without causing distress falls under the law of discipline.
Well, it is definitely very comforting to hear about these legal protections for our children. My last question for you would be, what steps are needed to strengthen child abuse prevention?
So I think this topic was addressed in the beginning of the show. So one of the biggest challenges Korea faces today is that many cases being labeled as abuse were never meant to be as abuse by the parents, especially by the poll that you given in the beginning. So the legal and social standards have changed faster than many families expected it to be, and the practices that once felt normal are now seen as harmful. So I think a key step is helping parents understand what today's standards look like in real life, what is safe, what crosses a line, and why certain actions can affect a child more deeply than we used to believe. So when parents have these kind of clear, simple guidance and real support, I think many of these borderline cases can be addressed before they ever reach the level of legal intervention.
All right, we really appreciate you sharing your legal expertise with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we just spoke with a legal expert about where the legal boundaries are and also about the kinds of support systems and policy changes that could strengthen child abuse prevention. And to get a sense of how the public views this issue, we also asked our viewers on the Arirang News YouTube channel, what do you think is most needed to prevent child abuse? So here's what the results showed. The responses showed that a majority of viewers, 55%, believe parental education and better parenting support are the most crucial factors. About 29% said stronger protection measures for victims are needed, while 16% emphasized the importance of improving the reporting system. So it's interesting to see that a majority of people view prevention as something that starts at home. The fact that nearly a third of respondents emphasize stronger victim protection shows they're still concerned that children aren't fully safeguarded even after abuse is identified. And the last 16% calling for a better reporting system really highlights how important it is for people to feel safe and confident when speaking up. So overall, the results suggest that preventing child abuse isn't just about one policy change. It's about strengthening the entire ecosystem around children, from families to institutions. So why is the role of adults around the child, so this includes teachers, neighbors, and relatives, so important in identifying abuse, Niall?
Because obviously the victims of child abuse are children, it's really not easy for them to report it, whether it be through the procedure or emotionally. In fact, children often hesitate to talk about their parents' abuse because it feels like tattling and it's shameful. And child abuse is a crime that requires adults around them to actively pay attention in order to protect them. Just individually as well as societal awareness is critical for this case.
So all this really highlights how child abuse isn't something a child can handle alone. It requires adults around them, even strangers, to care enough to notice and act on it. And as you mentioned, this crime relies heavily on also individual awareness. Sometimes it takes just one attentive adult to make a difference here. But why is it so important for society as a whole and not just parents to take responsibility for children's safety and well-being, Brooke?
Well, we have a saying, it takes a village to raise a child, right? And that's because it's not just the parents' responsibility, it's all of us. It's the community around the child, the society around them. And so when we look at the global situation here, it has improved, but it is still in a heartbreaking state. According to the International Labor Organization's data from just this year, about 138 million children were still engaged in child labor, dropping from 160 million in 2020, so some progress. And if we look at the long-term trend, it's actually almost halved since the year 2000. So again, very encouraging declines, but it's not enough. There are still 54 million children that are trapped in hazardous work that is threatening their livelihood and their well-being, and many more are suffering from neglect and other forms of exploitation. So we still need to work on this. We need to talk about this. Like we said, being attentive is important, and aware and observing your surroundings. If you see something, say something. There are many heart-wrenching cases where if just one person had noticed something and reported it, something could have been done. So trust your instincts, and let's do our best to protect our kids so that they can focus on being kids.
So like you said, this is a really ongoing issue, and there's a lot that we can all do. So at the end of the day, protecting children isn't just about laws or policies, it's about awareness, communication, and the willingness of adults and communities to step in when something doesn't feel right. And conversations like this are the first step. The more we talk openly about what discipline is and what is not, the more empowered we become to protect children. If we can better understand the line between discipline and harm, we can better protect the kids who often can't speak up for themselves, and that awareness starts with all of us. So that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Niall.
Yeah, no problem.
And also Brooke.
Of course, very informative show.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you have the best day. We are News Generation.